there's some major news out of Ukraine. First, we wanted to start with some absolutely shocking allegations being made by a former advisor to Zelensky. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. This is a translation of something that he put out and includes some of the quotes from that extraordinary Time magazine piece. Of Zelensky, he says, "Someone behaves like a dictator, and instead of following the normal path of accelerated development, he chooses stagnation. Then someone breeds massive corruption. Then someone breeds hatred for any opinion different from their own. And then a year and a half later, autumn comes, both in relations with the West and with our own people. No matter how much you deny reality, it doesn't go away. One of the stages of denial of this reality is an attempt to blame the damned Schusters for everything." He's talking about the reporter who wrote the Time magazine piece. "Instead of looking yourself in the eye." Quote, "Simon Schuster is an artist who perfectly senses the moment of truth. The Time magazine article reflects an unpleasant and vaguely familiar image." And really what he points to is that it's a dictator abandoned by everyone, wandering through the back streets of a bunker, unwilling to face reality, hysterically exclaiming about quick victory, which he's unable to achieve. An authoritarian leader to whom those around him are afraid to tell the truth. I think that fits very neatly, actually, with the portrait of a delusional Zelensky inside of his military bunker, where his own advisors are telling a Time magazine reporter on background openly that they are corrupt as hell, stealing everything that's not nailed to the ground like there's no tomorrow. They say that Zelensky cannot be reasoned with, that even though their battlefield victory is completely and totally unachievable and unrealistic, that they are continuing to say that publicly. But let's overlay that with some also breaking news that we want to say thank you to Gallup for providing us so that we could prepare these elements, with how the American people feel about this. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen, please. This is an extraordinary statistic. This is a question for Americans. Do you think the United States is doing too much to help Ukraine, not enough, or the right amount? 41% now say too much. 25% say not enough. 33% say the right amount. The extraordinary part is not that the plurality say too much, but that just a few months ago, Krystal, in June of 2023, it was 29% who said too much and 43% who said the right amount. The too much figure is rapidly accelerating. Now, let's go to the next one there, please, because this is another very important development. Would you prefer the United States end the conflict ASAP or support Ukraine in recapturing territory? No answer is 3%. Support reclaim is 54%, so it's still actually a majority. But end quickly is 43%. Again, though, rapidly changing in that direction. June of 2023, it was only 36% who wanted to rapidly end the conflict. So things are, again, accelerating. And then finally, let's put this one up there on the screen, please. Should the U.S. maintain its financial support to Ukraine, or should there be a time limit on that support? 37% say indefinitely. 61% now say it should be limited. And again, from the previous way that has been asked, that is an overall increase. So the final one, which again just shows you why I at the end of the day, you can't help but just trust Americans. Who is currently winning the Ukraine-Russia war? If you're going to ask the media, they were going to say Ukraine. 20% say Ukraine, 14% say Russia. Neither side, 64%. Americans are smart, as usual. They, on the long enough timeline, they will eventually come to the right answer. And even though they're being propagandized to all hell and being bombarded with all these fake offenses and all that, they know reality. They're like, we gave these people $50 billion, they didn't move an inch, and a bunch of people died in the interim. Doesn't seem fun to me. Doesn't seem like something that we should just keep continuing with the blank check, and it fits completely with also a new interview that we can put there, please, up on the screen, that underscores this. That in a new interview with The Economist, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces says, quote, "Just like in the First World War, we have reached the level of technology that puts us into a stalemate." So when the head of the actual Ukrainian, I mean, imagine the chairman of the Joint Chiefs or someone like that equivalent when America is in the middle of the war, just coming out and saying on the record, we are in the middle of a stalemate. That's what's just happened. So you would be called a Russian propagandist if you said this on MSNBC, but I guess anybody who wants to in the future, Krystal, can it just say, I'm quoting the head of the Ukrainian general staff?
Yes.
It's not difficult.
Yes. Yeah. And he goes on to say he thinks it would take some sort of a massive technological breakthrough.
People should read that interview.
It actually is remarkably honest because he talks about like, okay, at first I was like, maybe it's the commanders, maybe it's the soldiers themselves, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And then he started reading this book about World War I and was like, shit, this is exactly what's happening with us right now. Yeah. And he says that although he hopes that there would be some massive unforeseen technological leap to break the deadlock, quote, there will most likely be no deep and beautiful breakthrough. Think of that admission from this man. So the American people agree with the guy who's running the Ukrainian military. And I think there's so much to say about this. Between this and that Time article and then this former Zelensky aide just putting him on full blast, you can see that, there is a sense of real impending doom setting in and a realization. They're not stupid. They can see these polls. They can see the way that, what's going on in Israel has taken the spotlight off of them. They can see the way that constant attention on Ukraine has already long fallen off, that they really needed that to have any sort of a prayer here. They can see the huge disappointment in terms of the counteroffensive. They don't know what to tell their own people about this and what the failure was and how things are ever going to change and be different in the future. And so, when you've got a losing team effectively at this point, not to use a sort of trite sports analogy, but suddenly you get a lot of people complaining, you get a lot of people fighting, you get a lot of score settling, you get a little bit of truth that starts to come out. And Saagar, I know I say this over and over again, but I cannot stop going back to that original possibility of a peace deal being negotiated in Turkey that we said, no, we don't want a deal. We don't want a settlement. We want you to fight. And we sent these people into the meat grinder. We did it. Our government pushed them into the meat grinder. And guess what? Now, if they decided, all right, we're going to try to go to the table now and negotiate, they won't be able to get the deal that they could have gotten back then. Because back then they had momentum. They had caught, the Russians were not doing well. They had dramatically underperformed. The Ukrainians were dramatically overperformed. They had a lot more leverage in that negotiation at that time. So all this time of war and death and misery and suffering and all of that for what? To be in a worse negotiating position than they were at that time when we, along with the Brits, scuttled those negotiations.
Well, I gotta say, I am enraged that we are funding a military. He's like, yeah, I finally picked up a book on World War I. I'm like, dude, what, you eventually in the middle of the conflict decided, it's like, this is your job. Freaking amateur people from the very beginning. You can go back and roll the tape. We've been talking about it for 2 years now at this point, specifically the World War I analogy. But, it's very similar. The average age of the Ukrainian military right now is 43 years old.
Yeah.
And that, again, average. So what does that mean on the outer bound of that? What is the tail end? We're talking about 65-year-olds. That's what the Army of Northern Virginia looked like whenever it capitulated in 1865. They even remarked on it. They're like, we got teenagers and old men who are the people in the trenches who are up against us. So just like in the First World War, the flowery youth, some of the greatest men who ever lived were thrown into the trench and are dead. And people at that time, they knew that. They understood that some of the best people, truly, some of the bravest citizens, specifically from the UK, they didn't even need a draft for 2 years because people were so enthusiastic and they believed in the war, and they were crunched and they were killed almost immediately when they were thrown into that war. And also, this is the true lesson. Think about why World War I ended. World War I did not end just because of a military breakthrough. It ended because the German regime collapsed politically and no longer was able to sustain the war effort because its civilian population revolted against the Kaiser. Ukraine is setting itself up for a similar situation. You can hang on till the end if you want. You're not going to do it with our money, at least hopefully. And what will happen is that years and years will go by, people will start to starve, they're going to start to question, you're going to get violently overthrown, and that brings you to just like what happened to the Tsar or just like what happened to the German Kaiser, if you don't capitulate or if you don't sign a negotiation, because it's very clear that if they don't do it to preserve their current political regime, the Russians are going to win. Time is on their side. Russia's war machine is doing better than ever. Sure, they've lost a couple 100,000 people, but they've got millions. They don't care. They've got, their economy is basically sanction-proof at this point. I was just talking with Bridge Colby yesterday. They're selling oil at $20 above the price cap. They're fine. They're not doing well, but they're doing fine. Ukraine is not doing fine. They're really on their last legs. And when you are in that situation, Russia is probably least likely to negotiate now at this point. And the Ukrainians are the ones who have put themselves in that situation. But ultimately, we are the ones who we're the ones to blame more than anything.
We were driving this train.
We killed the peace deals. We let them think incorrectly that we would be there forever. And, now we're basically pulling the rug out from under them. So in a sense, I even understand some of the outrage, but I mean, we always knew it was politically unsustainable from the very beginning. The correct thing to do would have been to try and strike something. They decided not to do it. Hundreds of thousands of people are now dead. Billions of dollars have been wasted completely. I guess a bunch of weapons manufacturers got very wealthy and very rich, but that's the end result and the end state of this, as it almost always is.
And you know what? Yeah. The people who say, actually, we should have given them the long-range missiles right away. They actually have a point. If we were going to give them anyway,
yeah, you're right.
If we were going to eventually do it, they're actually correct that, they might have had a better shot if they'd had everything that we were planning on eventually giving them from the beginning. And so instead, they're in a very difficult position, and it's starting to become very clear. It's starting to become very public at a moment when U.S. support is absolutely faltering. So what the future holds, I don't know. But, there are a lot of regrets for our missed opportunities to achieve a peace that would have avoided so many lost lives and so much devastation. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.